great to hear Admiral Stavridis this morning set the strategic stage for us, both the threats and the opportunities, and it ties in beautifully with the theme of this whole session, not just today, but of the whole event. Ready for today, modernized for tomorrow. How do we maintain the edge? It seemed very right to establish right off the bat a panel of experts who can speak to that theme and also the theme of this panel itself. What are the challenges in delivering ready forces today? What you see in front of you are commanders who face those challenges, handle those challenges every day, and can speak authoritatively about the missions, the requirements, and their actions. We are fortunate today to have as moderator for this panel Vice Admiral retired Twig Branch. Many of you know him, of course, from his service in the military, service in the Navy, service to the fleet. It is indeed a pleasure to welcome an expert to help moderate this panel, someone with great credentials as a naval aviator, as a commander, accomplishing diverse missions across the fleet and across the world in peace and war. He's held a number of positions in information warfare, naval intelligence, certainly as the N2, N6, with a whole set of activities in C4ISR that he was responsible for the Navy, as well the CIO of the Navy and director of the Navy Cybersecurity. That's a lot of sailors and a lot of responsibilities for a worldwide mission that we're focusing on today. He is known as an innovator. I find it great that he's involved now as president of Drone Aviator, a company that's bringing new capabilities to the warfighter. But as an innovator, great success in the fleet, ashore, and afloat. He's also known well as an integrator of diverse capabilities, obviously from the background he holds and the experience he has. So it's right for him to try today to integrate our 7 speakers. With introductions that he'll make and comments that he'll make, we can be sure that he'll set the stage for a great conversation. Your questions are welcome. At the end, we have a limited amount of time, but we have a great amount of expertise. So without any further ado, I'd like to have you please welcome our moderator, Vice Admiral Twig Branch, and our panel.
Well, good morning and welcome. It's my pleasure and honor to be here with this group of professionals up here on the dais and try to moderate this panel as we go forward this morning. These things can go a couple of ways, and you've seen them both. One way is to have everybody do a 5 or 10 minutes worth of discussion down the row and get to questions, or I can short circuit that and just give you a brief who's who up here, and then we can get right into it, and that's what we're going to do. We'll try to save some time, fence some time at the end to take your questions. That's usually the most important part of these panel opportunities, and so we'll look forward to that. I'm not going to do detailed introductions to these guys. Their bios are all on the website or in the app, and you can look those up if you don't already know them. Many of you know who these gentlemen are, but I just will run down the list here. Vice Admiral Mike Shoemaker next to me, Naval Aviator, A7, F-18 time, Squadron Air Wing and Strike Group Command times a couple. Extensive experience as a warfighter in naval aviation, and also has a lot of experience in the Navy personnel system. Now he's the commander of Naval Air Forces, the Air Boss. Next to him, Lieutenant General Lou Craparotta, Marine Corps Infantry Officer and Combat Marine, also served on the Joint Staff, SOC UR, Director of Ops at Northcom, and now the Commanding General at 1MEF. Next to him, Rear Admiral Fritz Roegge, the career submariner with experience in both fast attack and missile boats. He commanded at the ship, squadron, and group level, has extensive experience on operational and Washington staffs and in the personnel area. Now he's the commander of submarine forces in the Pacific. Next to him, Rear Admiral Matt Kohler, a career intelligence officer who's filled many important intel slots, including Africa Command, Special Operations Command, and Central Command. He's also a computer scientist. He served as Deputy Commander of Fleet Cyber Command, U.S. 10th Fleet, and also as the Deputy Chief for Tailored Access Operations at the National Security Agency. He truly fits the Naval Information Warfare Officer model and now serving as the first commander of Naval Information Forces. Rear Admiral Pat Piercey is a surface warfare officer, nuclear trained, commanded at DDG. He was reactor officer in John C. Stennis and was the CO of the cruiser Bunker Hill. He also commanded Carrier Strike Group 9 in the Pacific. He served in the European Command, Pacific Fleet, and the White House, so a very diverse set of experiences. He's now the commander of the Atlantic Fleet Surface Force. Rear Admiral Tim Szymanski is Naval Special Warfare with assignments covering essentially everything across the spectrum that Navy Special Warfare does, from SEAL delivery vehicle teams to Navy Special Warfare Development Group, a special boat unit, a SEAL team, a task force in Afghanistan. He's coming from the Assistant Commanding General at Special Operations Command, and he's now serving as Commander, Naval Special Warfare Command. And then Brian Brakke, an Explosive Ordnance Disposal Officer. He's held various assignments in the world of EOD, Naval Explosive Ordnance Disposal Technology Division, and Task Force 52 over in the Middle East. He was Deputy Director for Operations of the Joint Improvised Threat Defeat Agency, and now he's the commander of Naval Expeditionary Combat Command. So a very talented and full panel that look across the breadth of what we do in our Navy. Now, we've all heard and read a great deal about our Navy and Marine Corps and the current state of their readiness. Admirals Richardson, Moran, and Davidson are all on the record prioritizing increasing the readiness of today's force prior to launching into a big expansion. The readiness issues span the breadth of naval warfighting capability. For naval aviation, it sounds like a shortage of both ready basic aircraft to allow adequate flight hours for training, and also, in some cases, lack of availability of higher-end equipment and spares, again, mainly affecting the training of our next deployers. The aviation depots are jammed, and we are increasingly challenged by high operational tempo of the last dozen years. For our surface forces, we hear about congestion and lack of capacity in the yards and the struggle to get ships out in a timely manner. There's also the continuing evolution of the littoral combat ship and the revisions to the LCS concept of operations with respect to crewing, mission modules, and rotations. For our Marine brethren, there has been a lot of discussion about rebluing or getting our Marines back to sea following the last 13 plus years of focus on a land war in the Middle East and Southwest Asia. As we travel that journey back to sea, we revisit the question of adequate amphibious lift and innovative ways to structure and organize the forces we have to accomplish that mission. Our submarine community seems to be on an upward vector with additional and evolving Virginia-class submarines and the necessary and essential focus on replacing the Ohio-class fleet ballistic missile submarine that form the basis for the most important leg of our national deterrent. Yet even those circumstances, we're still challenged to get submarines out of the shipyards on time for the absolutely and get the absolutely essential maintenance done that they need to conduct their missions. For Navy Special Warfare, the last 16 years have stressed the force, and the demand signal, if anything, seems to be increasing. Special Ops forces continue to be the tool of choice to enable success in the conflicts in the Middle East and Southwest Asia, and we have all heard the idea floated about significantly increasing the size of our Special Operations forces. I wonder if we have the capacity to train. For Naval Expeditionary Combat Community, they continue to support operations around the world with many unique capabilities that they bring to the problem. These capabilities are essential in combat, but also very important in situations short of combat. NECC had some challenges a little over a year ago that pointed to training and readiness. Perhaps we'll hear how some of those challenges have been addressed. All the Navy and Marine Corps organizations operate in the information domain. In today's world, information is a warfighting domain equating to undersea, surface, air, land, space. It's a sixth domain, and it includes cyber. There are some who say that if we don't get it right in the information domain, it won't matter very much what we do in the others. The information warfare community is maturing and increasingly bringing their crucial capabilities and effects to the forefront. With us on the panel this morning are precisely the right leaders to address these challenges for our Navy and Marine Corps. These are the warfare community leaders, and except for Lieutenant General Craparotta, they are known as type commanders, or TICOMs, in charge of the manning, training, and equipping of our force. I'll have some questions for the panel, and I invite these leaders also to comment on my opening remarks if they would like to. After I ask a few questions, we'll afford some time for audience Q&A. So to get right into it, the last 15 years of conflict in the Middle East, coupled with our enduring commitments, resulted in a high operational tempo for naval forces. As type commanders, you oversee the manning, training, and equipping of the force. What is your assessment of the readiness of your community, and what is your most pressing need?
All right. Well, thanks, Twig. I guess I'll start, and great to have you up here moderating, and great to see you out in San Diego. And thanks for your service for many years. I'll start, I think, with and reflect back on what Vice Chief talked about in his recent testimony, and he characterized our readiness challenges back there due to a couple of things. One of them was op-tempo and the demand for naval forces around the world, which has not abated, and it's been obviously going very strong since 9/11. But I look across our forces with the carrier strike groups we've got worked up on deployment now, working up to deploy, and the one in FDNF that we have to keep ready. So it's 6 of our carriers, Vincent deployed, Bush deployed, Nimitz, Theodore Roosevelt, and Ike ready to deploy, and then Reagan we've got to keep ready. So 6 of really our 8 carriers available, if I don't count my 2 RCOH carriers and Ford, who will deliver later this year. So 6 of 8 manned up with 30 expeditionary squadrons or detachments around the world. That's just from a naval aviation perspective. So that's the demand. The supply to provide those forces is not keeping up with demand signal. It gets at the resourcing the Vice Chief talked about last week as well. He talked about and I'll say it's been a sort of a steady decline, but most acute since sequestration. We don't like to get back and talk about sequestration, but we dug an incredible readiness divot across the force that we have not filled in yet, and we continue to fly below the glide slope in terms of filling in some key accounts, not just flying hour account for us, but also our readiness enabler accounts that I talk about a lot. So if I look at the, kind of the resourcing across the force, not keeping up with that demand signal, and I'll use one example, and one of them that comes into play when Vice Chief talked about essentially a third of our force being ready basic, third of our force up, the ready basic aircraft that we can fly. That's an accurate number. It's about a quarter of them that are not in reporting, so they're in a depot somewhere being worked on. It's about 20% that are non-mission capable supply. That number continues to grow. An example I'll use is APN 6, which is an account that funds our initial outfitting for spares, and it also covers the stock on our shelves on our carriers, our amphibs, and also in our shore bases. And that account was funded about 90% in the early 2000s. 4 years or so before sequestration, it was funded at about 85%. Since sequestration, it's been funded at 75%. This year it was at 71% of the requirement. So that's year on year, we've kind of been funding less of the requirement overall, and not surprisingly, or not unexpectedly, our full mission capable aircraft have come down from about 55%, which is we tried to work in a band between 50 and 60 years ago, to less than 30% today, FMC. That connection is not hard to make, so that is clearly, as Vice Chief talked about, resourcing is part of it. Joe Malloy gave us an update this morning on what we could expect or potentially expect. I think we're all anticipating some relief coming. When it will happen, I don't know, but I think if you listen to each of the TICOMs as we go down the row here, they'll talk about the challenges of generating forces and recovering readiness in this current very fiscally constrained environment. So as Twig alluded to up front, our biggest challenge is the ready basic aircraft and getting sufficient numbers for our aviators to fly, most acutely in maintenance phase. We're doing okay getting forces out on deployment and sustaining them, but we're accepting more and more risk in the other phases of OFRP. So I'll stop there, and we can talk a little bit later about kind of the balances we do back in D.C. with our key programmatic folks, some miraculous work that Mike Manazar and Bullet Miller have done inside aviation, but I'd say that's probably our biggest challenge from readiness perspective is the ready basic aircraft, and then we've got some carrier challenges too.
Joe.
Okay, so I'll address it from a little different perspective. Up at 1MEF, we really have 2 responsibilities. One's generating forces primarily to sustain requirements in PACOM and CENTCOM, and then the second piece is we are the warfighting MEF for the Marine Corps. So we train add depth on the bench, as we like to say, for a major combat operation should something like that arise. So really two real drivers up at the MEF when it comes to maintaining or sustaining readiness. And one is tempo. And if you listen to the Assistant Commandant's testimony last week, and I think you'll hear it as a theme, we talk about our 1 to 2 deployment to dwell tempo and the fact that the force really wasn't built to sustain 1 to 2 deployment to dwell. What that means to everybody out here is for every 7 months you're deployed, you get 14 months at home. And I think the force originally was probably built for about a 1 to 3. I'm not sure if 1 to 3 is a requirement, but I know that 1 to 2 is unsustainable. When you get to 1 to 2, it impacts how much time you have to train. Obviously, we're a young force, and if you look at some of our specialties, we rotate people in and out, so the manpower system is not necessarily built to keep up with a 1 to 2 depth to dwell. Limited training time means you got to balance when you train and how you maintain equipment. If you look at our ground equipment with our AAVs, LAVs, our Humvees, you're looking at a very old fleet, so you're trying to balance maintenance with your training. And then there's taking care of people, the aspect of, how long can you sustain a 1 to 2 and the impact on your career force, because some of the younger folks will tell you they join because they want to deploy a lot, but some of your career force, your staff NCOs and your officers, mid-grade officers, the impact that it has on the long-term health of the institution. So that's really the depth to dwell, the tempo piece that we deal with. I think the other piece would be the budget, the reality of the budget. So for a ground budget, not talking about the aviation dollars, we've gone from $240 million in 14 to about $180 million in 16. So 25% reduction over that 5-year period, which means over time, different commanders, different people have taken risk in different areas. And we don't have the repairables that we would like to have on the shelf. We can't do maintenance when we'd like to. In many cases, you defer maintenance so that you can train. And the impact of, the cumulative impact of the budget and the unpredictability of the funding over time has had a significant impact on readiness. So we're always looking at risk mitigation, what we buy, when we buy it, what we don't have to buy, what you can put off over time. But frankly, where we are today, I think, is most of the mitigation has been done. And we're looking or hoping for some budget relief. And I think those two themes, if you look at what the Assistant Commandant said last week and what you'll hear coming out of D.C. over time, those are really the themes for the institution and the things that are impacting the MEF. So I'll stop there and pass it on to Fritz.
Thanks, General. Admiral Roegge.
Okay, thank you very much. So obviously, as the submarine force commander, I benefit from the magic that is nuclear power. And as a result, execution year budget challenges affecting things like steaming hours and flying hours, that's not so much of a concern. So overall, the quick answer to the question, how ready is the submarine force? I'm pleased to report the submarine force is doing pretty well. I think we're very ready. Certainly, as Admiral Shoemaker pointed out, we're able to meet all of our forward deployed commitments. I think on the manning side, I've never seen such eye-watering talent, and I continue to be grateful every day for the young men and women now serving in the submarine force. But of course, we also are not without our challenges, and one of the easiest ways to describe that is with respect to the fact that the demand for what services we provide in the submarine force continues to grow, and it's a demand that historically we have never met, and we will probably continue to be challenged to meet in the future. Now, in fairness, part of that is because that demand signal is what's registered by the combatant commanders, and it is, in the classic sense, an unconstrained demand signal. So as they provide their inputs, their requirements or desirements to the Secretary of Defense and the Joint Staff, I mean, there is no limit on what they can ask for. But the fact is, those are generally pretty well-founded requirements, and we don't have the force structure to be able to meet everything. So what can we do then? The things that we try and do in order to get our forces forward in the numbers, at the time, and in the places required, things that we can control on my end is first trying to make sure that we're very, very efficient in the inter-deployment training cycle. Try and wring every day of savings we can in my job of training and certifying crews. And so we're looking internally at things that we can do to make that more efficient and more effective. But then coming back around to the other theme of your question, Admiral Branch, what do I need? I've got kind of the same need that I think everybody else does. It has to do with resources, and in particular it has to do with the effectiveness or the efficiency with which I can get my submarines into and out of their availabilities. It's certainly shipyard availabilities at the depot level, but it's also even the intermediate level availabilities. So anything that we can do to try and get boats in and out more quickly is giving me a chance to improve the operational availability, the A sub O, that I provide to the combatant commanders.
Okay, thanks, Admiral Roegge. Admiral Kohler?
Thanks, Admiral Branch, and thanks to the Naval Institute and FCA for hosting yet another terrific event. I understand these things are growing by this year another 20%, so clearly hitting the right demand signal. From an information warfare TICOM perspective, many challenges there. We've been in existence. I stopped calling ourselves new. Almost 2.5 years since we stood up. My challenges are, frankly, is meeting the increasing demand signals on the kind of capabilities that information warfare currently provides and is expected to provide in the near and midterm futures. Plenty of fellow leaders here across different warfare areas will talk about not just the rules of the game changing for us, but the game has changed in terms of the expectations and the environment that our naval forces are expected to operate in. We know that we're talking about getting back into being good at sea control, being expected to operate in an environment that is contested not just physically, but also spectrally, in a communications contested environment, and continue to fight well on that. The concept of distributed lethality, all of those place a significant demand signal on information warfare and the capabilities that we bring. So my challenge is keeping pace with this demand signal and providing the kind of capabilities and skills needed to meet those demand signals. An example of where we are rapidly evolving here is within a few weeks we will IOC stand up our Information Warfighting Development Center. That organization will be focused on meeting this demand signal, creating and advancing new tactics, techniques, and procedures across all of the information warfare domain: intelligence, METOC, cyber, cryptologic warfare, intelligence, IT and IP type of skill sets. These kind of skill sets are in high demand, and we expect that type of TTPs to be developed here. We'll develop our own subject matter experts, our warfare tactics instructors, as other warfare areas have developed them in their WDCs across those critical mission areas. And making no mistake, this will be a center for innovation to rapidly develop and deliver the kind of capabilities the fleet needs now and in the near future in a whole perspective in terms of equipment, capability, and train individuals to execute those. So clear challenges for us. In terms of readiness, we have a different kind of readiness model. While we certainly have a significant investment in readiness for information warfare capabilities afloat, a significant part of what we deliver, a very significant part of what we deliver, is from ashore. And we don't enjoy, if I use enjoy loosely, an OFRP cycle. Readiness for us is constant. Our networks, our communications, they're always on. They don't get a break. And so maintaining the readiness at 100% is a challenge here. And while we have many specific readiness challenges, I can tell you a significant part of our workforce is what our civilian sailors bring to our fight. And facing challenges like hiring freeze and others put a dent in our ability to provide that kind of talent. We're working through some of those issues now, but certainly affects us probably more acutely than some of the other warfare areas. And then pending any questions, those are my opening comments.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Admiral Pierson?
Thank you, Admiral Branch. First, the forces we're deploying now are ready, so I want to say that up front. They're ready. You can look at what Mason did, the NHTSA did, the WASP, Carl Vinson, the Ike Strike Group that just got back, the Bush that's going over. So the forces we're deploying are ready. The question then is, where's the risk on the forces that we're getting ready and getting ready to surge? And so really I'm going to add reinforcing fires here. Reduced funding, budget uncertainty is obviously offering challenges here. I'd say the low-hanging fruit's been picked. And so what I'm directly interested right now really is fully funding and executing maintenance. And I put that in a context. I don't think we can just talk about maintenance. Obviously, for surface ships, it's clear what maintenance is necessary for, but we ought to think about maintenance and modernization together. As we need to increase our capability and the capacity of the capabilities that we need. When do I insert that capability? I insert that during maintenance periods. And so I need those maintenance periods to be executed as planned with the additional capabilities we need for modernization to address a higher end threat. I think anything else I would say is basically reinforcing fires of what the other TICOMs have said.
Okay, thanks. Admiral Szymanski?
Yeah, thanks, Admiral Branch. So similarly, you'll hear a few similar comments on the challenges to our readiness. And first of all, I think there's the theme of our forces that go forward from naval special warfare are always in a high state of readiness. They're in a C1 state of readiness. And for me, to sustain that C1 readiness is the most important aspect. So sustainment of the readiness. And I'll put it in this context. One of the threats that Admiral Stavridis talked about today was the violent extremist organization threat. And that's the primary threat challenge for United States Special Operations Command. And we've been in that, addressing that threat for the last 16 years. So the violent extremist organization threat, as Admiral Stavridis laid it out this morning, was still the #1 threat that was out there that's an enduring threat. And we don't see a relief from that threat for somewhere out into 10 years, so where we ever get any return. So to maintain my force of SEALs and my supporting capabilities through that high demand signal, that increasing demand signal from the GCCs for some of the near-peer competitor things, for some of the build partner nation capacity, the security force assistance, is being able to have a crisp narrative of not breaking the what we call our inter-deployment training cycle, and so that that 2-to-1 concept that was mentioned earlier, it's really a 3-to-1 for naval special warfare, and trying to maintain so that I can work up for the VEO challenge, the Violent Extremist Organization challenge, as well as some of the niche maritime capabilities that we provide against the higher end scenarios. So the challenges to that readiness, and we asked about mass producing SOF, obviously that goes against a SOF truth. And that won't happen anytime soon. But one of the other soft truths is that it was the 5th one added by Admiral Olson late, is that we're heavily dependent on other conventional support, whether that's Navy, Army, or Air Force, Marine, civilian, contractor. We're heavily reliant on other support to what we do. In my combat support, my combat service support folks that are assigned to naval special warfare, they're typically on a 1 to 2 rotation, and so where they're not necessarily working up with the same team that they're going to deploy with, and then we turn them around much quicker. So if I've got any challenges, really working through the personnel system to get my commands manned in my technical support, analysts, gunners, mates, communicators, manned to 100%. Continuing resolution Hertz is there with the way orders are being processed right now and getting enough people in to get them into some sort of workup. As part of that inter-deployment training cycle in preparation for their 6-month deployment. And so my challenge is sustainment of this force through the next 10 years to be able to maintain a common fight right now against the violent extremist organization, but prepared for those other things short of conflict on the high-end scenarios. Thanks.
Thanks, Tim. Admiral Brakke?
Thank you, Admiral Branch. So I'll reinforce as well. I would say that we are at capacity with accepted risk within our force. So when the OPNAV N9 was created and we married up the equipment with the personnel into a single resource sponsor, our people are our platform. So our biggest cost is our force. So as we looked at fiscal constraints across the years, our force was naturally something that was reduced. 2013, we were about leveled with the force that we have now, and we'll continue to work that. There were still reductions that were required. Those were taken more in our S3s and our S4s, not in our S5s and S6s that have to go out and fill those requirements. So that ability to generate that force is where we've now accepted some of the risk. We're at capacity with what we do in sourcing our GFM requirements. My biggest concern is if something that changes. So Tim kind of mentioned the 2-to-1, 3-to-1 that's out there. During OIF and OEF, our forces were almost at a 6 months on, 6 months off. So if we're required to do anything additional, that ability to generate that force is what I'll have to look at key to reinforce my training environment, and then also the health of the forces as we would operate at that level. I would say the other thing that we've done is some deferred maintenance. So our 34-foot patrol boats are our workhorse right now in high-value unit escort. We're getting into a service life extension with them. We're looking forward to bringing out the PBX next. So I would say those are our two biggest concerns.
Okay, thanks, Admiral Brakke. I'm going to throw this question out as a toss-up, so we won't have to go down the row. So feel free to jump in and opine and agree or disagree as you might. We're emerging from a period where the operational environment was fairly permissive. Now, I'm sure some of our special warfare folks might take exception to that. It wasn't permissive for them. But from a naval force standpoint, a permissive environment, there's greater recognition now that we need to prepare for a high-end fight as we move forward against more capable adversaries. So what changes are your communities making to prepare for that high-end conflict?
I'll jump on that one. So first public service announcement, over a year ago, Admiral Roden talked about his part in contributing to the design for maintaining maritime superiority. So that was the surface strategy. So that was recently a release at the SNA. So the important part of the surface force strategy really is the return to sea control. So we haven't forgot about sea control. I mean, it's a primary mission, but we've rightly emphasized power projection for the last 15 years. So the surface force is really focusing in on returning to sea control. I mean, part of that is to stand up the NSMITIC organization, the WIDIs, what we're doing in terms of focusing on tactics. But there's a question I want to sort of plant the seed on is what do we need to do today to ensure that we have the forces that we need for sea control in the future? I want to go back, and I want to go back a little bit into history here because that's also in our design that talks about, hey, if we're going to sort of work through a problem statement, let's not forget our history and let's study our history. So there's some interesting comments here. With the interesting history, with the disappearance of the battleship, the coming of the nuclear-powered submarine, and improving the manned aircraft of World War II, the surface ship's role became unclear. In the judgment of many naval planners, there was no mission that couldn't be better done by naval forces other than the surface combatant. These developments encouraged the concentration of resources in planning on the clearly offensive and glamorous Navy missions. Surface warships were seen merely as defensive forces, their future role blurred and ill-defined. Virtually no money was spent to arm surface ships offensively, either with guns, missiles, or torpedoes. However, as inevitably happens in the maneuvering of nations to gain technical and numerical military superiority, the nature of the threat began to change. The safe use of the sea was never more clearly essential of our national survival. Control of the sea lanes, which now demanded protection against any combination of threats, once again became a respected offensive mission. So this was written by Admiral Wayne E. Meyer in 1977. So I mention that because I think when you look at the CSBA study, the MITRE study, and the Navy study, you know, that's talking about what the future force will look like and the number of ships, regardless of how you look at that and those studies, where your opinion might be, it talks about a future surface combatant. And the question that I want to throw out on behalf of the SWO boss to think about, and he'll come back in a year, I'll task him, to come back in a year and talk about is how are we going to be organized to take a look at the capabilities that we need, the requirements to support those capabilities, the engineering of the system of systems, capturing the wholeness, ILS, training, manning, et cetera, build in upgradability, take lessons that we learned, for example, out of the submarine community with the Seawolf into Virginia, you know, for us, Zumwalt into whatever follows on. And what is that going to look like? You know, so we had the great story of the Aegis experience. I would ask, what's Aegis 2? You know, and so, I mean, I was trying to find the right word. You know, the Greek fire is Pyros. I'm not Greek, unlike Admiral Stavridis. You know, I'm not suggesting that's the next name. But I think that's a question that we're asking today to be ready for the future in terms of the capability that we need to have for that high-end fight.
So on behalf of the submarine force, one of the things I already kind of mentioned, which is that I think it's very important that we try and look at everything that we do in the training and certification of getting boats ready for deployment, and recognize that every deployment is potentially going to be a set of circumstances that could lead to actual warfare at some point. So making sure that our commanding officers have the tools, have the equipment, have the training, have the certification, and have the mindset to recognize that they're doing what the Navy has always done, which is going in harm's way. So we've just completed an effort that we slapped the table on last week between Sublant and Subpac on modifying, or what we're referring to as tuning our FRTP in order to try and make sure that we're teaching and training the right kinds of skills that are preparing our boats not only for the very challenging peacetime missions, but also in the event that we should have to fight. In that regard, I think there's great work going on across the Pacific, and I really give my boss, Admiral Swift, credit for leading this in wargaming various concepts, and then going out and conducting exercises at sea with real ships when we can, with virtual or synthetic ones when required, in order to test out those concepts. So there's a lot of great work going on in gaming and exercising. Third thing that we're doing to prepare for the high-end fight, of course, has to do with not only the maintenance, but as Admiral Piercey had mentioned, also the modernization that happens during those maintenance and the depot-level maintenance periods. So there's a lot of great capability which is being delivered to the submarine force thanks to the work of all of you out in industry. And then the last thing I just mentioned is the development, the stand-up just a little over a year ago of our warfighting development centers, really across all the type commanders. Ours, the Undersea Warfare Development Center, is in Groton, Connecticut. They're really uniquely leveraged and tasked in order to help us with development of doctrine, with the development of tactics, and with the kinds of assessments into what kind of future capabilities are going to be required. And we're having great return on investment from the good work of the UWDC in synergy with the other warfighting development centers.
So if I'm just talking from an aviation perspective, and I'll describe our kind of just a future air wing. And I mentioned the readiness challenges, but the great work that our folks back in Washington, D.C., certainly in N98, Mike Manhauser and Bullitt Miller have done to balance the readiness, the procurement and modernization aspects of our force. Now, we've accepted risk in readiness, and that's acknowledged, I believe, but they've been able to keep that future air wing and our transitions in type model series on track. And so a huge shout out to them. We've got, and the ones I'll talk about in particular are E2Ds, which we just put our first E2D squadron in Iwakuni. So that puts those most capable assets forward in FDNF, as we've talked about doing all along. Our E-18G Growlers are transition complete in that community. They've been plugged in on deployments and expeditionary roles, and with our joint forces around the world, and really, I think we're learning a lot about their contributions. Even though we talk 4th and 5th Gen and what 5th Gen brings with terms of Air Force 5th Gen, they still rely on and ask for growlers to support them. And there's some unique things we're learning about growler and that integrated air wing. And then just a couple, just shy of a month ago, we went up in Lemoore. We had the first F-35Cs that arrived up in Lemoore to stand up the new first FRS. It was VFA 125, old F-18 FRS. So those platforms have been flying in Eglin for us for a while now. We're the third service, obviously, moving into F-35 and 5th gen. But it now shows up in Lemoore. We'll IOC our first squadron around 2019, and then move in to integrate that platform into our future air wings. And I think that's the key piece, is integration of those assets, the platforms, the weapons they bring, the sensors, and probably most important are the networks as we prepare for this high-end fight. And Admiral Tafalo, Fritz's sub-boss, as Admiral Roden did not too long ago, invited all the TICOMs to come together at their aviation or their flag officer symposiums. And we talk about kind of across each of the communities what we're doing. And I think that network piece is probably the most important as we look to share information among our surface and submarine forces, certainly with Fritz's team, who's forward into any contested environment already there. How do we get that information shared across the force? Do it in a manner where it's low probability of picking it up, low probability of detection, but that we can count on that. And when we don't, we practice to operate inside those contested environments. Fleet Forces Command has worked both with Strike Group 4 and 15 as we prepare our strike groups, both carrier and expeditionary, heading out the door, and put them through the rigors that they will need to be able to practice and operate in a contested environment. So I think that's kind of a key piece to our preparations for that high-end fight. And then I'll foot stomp the warfighting development centers. We probably are the most mature in our air wing or in our Naval Aviation Warfighting Development Center in Fallon. But there's some great synergy coming from NSMIDC, the Surface and Mine Warfighting Development Center, as well as Undersea Warfighting Development Center. And then Matt's Information Warfighting Development Center will be key as we integrate all that. And we've got the ability now in Fallon to do some things, training for that high-end fight, where we integrate both surface ship, Aegis Baseline 9 cruiser, DDGs and cruisers with E-2Ds and our Super Hornets to practice Navy Integrated Fire Control. So that's the first step into what I hope will be a larger effort inside Fallon as we grow that, the ability to practice live, virtual, and constructed, primarily virtual and constructed. But all of those, I think, are contributing to the high-end piece.
I'll add on to some of the discussions here. We're really talking about the increasing demand signal capabilities out of our tactical operating forces. Admiral Shoemaker mentioned it, and Admiral Roegge mentioned it. The certifying events, the COM2Xs, and other opportunities for our deploying forces. If anyone's had an experience of that's more than 18 months ago, you almost wouldn't recognize it. The level of the bar in terms of the demand signal has been raised significantly. And the kind of capabilities, the TTPs and others that are rapidly being, I'll say, exercised and shaken through are key enablers for us to really pull vote forward in our capabilities. The WDCs that we're talking about here, in a mutual way, are really foundational for us to be able to capture that and turn that back around in a rapid way. I mentioned that the IWDC will be IOCing in a few weeks. We haven't waited for IOC to be moving out in some of the tasks, and we've been really deeply involved with surface forces, with submarine forces, SWAT, for example, the Surface Warfare Advanced Tactics training that's being done, emphasizes like pre-integrated training to get them ready for the integrated training phase. We've been significantly involved with helping them with cyber efforts, electronic warfare, EMW type of TTP. All of that is really raising the bar in how we're doing business. So again, the WDCs are really a critical way for us to move ahead. Other places where the demand signal is really clear and pulling information warfare capabilities ahead is an example of, on the surface forces, the demand signal for a full-time intelligence professional on board to help them manage their communications and their networks. We have changed that model significantly. We have increased the IP training pipeline for those individuals out to a 20-week course from a 4-week course. And now there's full-time IPs currently arriving on the surface combatant fleet where none had existed before. Again, that's a demand signal because the need was there, and meeting that demand signal is something I think we've been pretty responsive to, and need to be. But there's much to be done. We've also lined out, as part of the IWDC, an information warfare training group that aligns unit and basic level training to make sure that the units, as they come out of a maintenance phase, have all of the ATG-like basic training enabled them, because as they go into the integrated phase, they're going out and right into the high-end type of exercise and operations. So it's another large step that we are implementing here in the next several months.
Thanks.
So I guess I'd just make maybe 3 points. One is the first thing we did to address the near peer was adjust our service level training. So as we work our way through training prior to deployment, our service level training venues that all our forces go to have now incorporated near peer threat. They've incorporated counter UAS. They've incorporated the IO threat, the electronic warfare threat. So we've adjusted our training. The second thing I think we did in the institution was we re-energized our warfighting lab. So through experimentation and in conjunction with our concept and development and integration division, we've developed some new concepts. We've energized our experimentation at the warfighting lab, and we're looking at how we're going to operate in the future environment. And then I think the third thing that we're doing is we're looking at the capabilities across the force. And I think this was in ACMEC's testimony last week, and you hear the Commandant talk about it routinely, the Force 2025, and that's how we build some of the capabilities that we are going to need in the future fight, how we build those into the institution. And you'll hear the discussion about the building the initial 3,000, building the Marine Corps up to 185,000, and how EW, IO capabilities are going to be incorporated, and then building beyond 185,000, what the force needs to look like to fight in 2025.
Okay, any others?
Start if I can quickly. Three quick points. The first one's more about a framing point, in that the enemy has watched us fight now for 16 years in the counterinsurgency, combating terrorism, violent extremists fight, as well as our own Blue Force has looked at special warfare and SOF through that same lens. And we've got to change that lens for the high-end scenarios. So point two is, I mentioned in the opening comments, I do have some very unique capabilities, maritime capabilities in our family of craft, both surface and undersea, as well as the integration of many things we've done over the course of the last 15 years of integrating sensors and unmanned, toys, if you will. So the biggest factor for me moving forward is, as we talked about the distributed lethality and sea control, and we talked about the undersea aspect as well as even the air component, is that all the systems that I have and all the capabilities that I'm developing at a much smaller level need to be completely compatible with the next Zumwalt, with the next, and so that I can, in those higher end scenarios, be able to support at a different level outside of the combating terrorism view. That's it, sir.
And sir, for our force, I think so. This key concept of distributed lethality is very important. For us, it's how we support that. So how, through our own distributed operations, can we help enable that maneuver? For our Naval LSG folks, we've developed an expeditionary ordnance loading concept, so they can go out into austere environments and conduct those reloads when and where they're needed. We've introduced the Mark 6 patrol boat to our coastal riverine force. It's a little bit more firepower than our other craft have had. We can also launch our Mark 18 Mod 2 UUVs off of that in an expeditionary MCM environment. I'd also like to try to look to the technology that we're getting to with a swarm ability. If I can able to put that type of a capability on that gives me additional defense in depth or offense in depth from that craft as well. From the CVs, we're looking at airfield damage repair, how we can either do those surveys quicker, what tools and equipment can we use to create those repairs faster in austere environments. I mentioned expeditionary MCM, so that's a capability of our MCM platoons with the Mark 18 UUV platoons, and add in a post-mission analysis cell and a C2, and that gives you a unit of action that can go out and operate from any platform and help reinforce the MCM capabilities of our forces currently. The other concept that's coming around right now is littoral operations in a contested environment, or LOCI. So we're looking at how our forces fit into that, how we pair with the Marines, whether it's more of a small-scale effort in the Expeditionary Warfare Commander or Expeditionary Advanced Base operations. Where do we fit into that, and where do we integrate under the Composite Warfare Commander concept? And the last thing that I would add is what we do to kind of get our CTF commanders up to a higher level is we conduct rehearsal of concept drills. So we look into our O plans from different aspects. We try to go through force generation and when those forces are needed in a given time in a conflict. We look at the logistics and then how to support them. And then those task force commanders can then look at the adaptive force packages that they'll have to employ, and then where we can get down to mission command and understanding how to execute in a denied comms environment.
Okay, thanks. Next question, I'll throw this one out as a toss-up as well. We've read a lot about some of the changes coming with Sailor 2025 in terms of how we train our sailors, how we recruit, retain, sometimes inject them into the force. Can you share your sense of what the impact of those changes will have on the waterfront or the flight line or the foxhole in your communities? And are you concerned about any of those changes and the things that they will bring?
Start from I think we've done, there's a lot of great work going on in terms of the, as we move forward and manage our talent of the future. I think the first we've talked about a ready relevant learning concept, and I think the approach was very good. We've spent a lot of time educating and training our sailors, and then maybe get not a lot of return on that investment before their enlistment may be up. So I think we're adjusting the way we train to focus on the things, those skill sets they would need in an early block training coming through our typical traditional A schools, get to the fleet, and then we start delivering follow-on training when it is most, in a manner and a timing when it's most, I think, most impactful and most relevant. And I think the concerns as we move forward there are, the timing of that delivery of those follow-on block concepts, whether they be tied to a PCS move or tied to sometime during a tour when you have to give have a sailor leave a command, leave a squadron, leave a ship to go and conduct that block learning. So there's some, working through how that will be delivered. We're blessed in the aviation world to have our Center for Naval Aviation Technical Training units in each of our fleet concentration areas. So I think that will be one that we'll manage fairly easily as we move forward. But there's I think as we do ready relevant learning, one of the pillars there of Sailor 2025, the focus on how we deliver that training in those blocks will be a challenge. The other one inside our community is how we take advantage of experience on a platform. When a sailor gets that experience, how do we retain and recycle that experience instead of having to move them between various platforms? This aviation maintainer experience saves us on the training dollars en route, saves us when that sailor reports to a command, they show up as an all-up round, ready to jump back into their whatever qualifications they had before. So there's a piece of this where I think we can help ourselves by focusing on that, how we best reutilize those skill sets that are in individual type platforms. So I'll stop there for that one.
Sir, I'll jump on the comments there on some of the great initiatives under this broad umbrella of Sailor 2025. From the perspective of ready relevant learning, there is, I'll say, great goodness in there for skill sets in information warfare. In particular, rates like our IT and IS ratings, particularly our ITs, where we've put them through a long training track, through A school and C school, through a traditional model, and they use some of what they have learned in their first tour, and by the time they get to their second tour, what they learned 5 years before, not only do they not remember, it's just frankly not relevant anymore, part of the RRL. And so taking that training and looking at that in a much smarter way of providing those ITs with the training that they need geared for their first and relevant for their first tour, and then adding in that training as technology has changed, as the TTPs have changed and others, makes perfect sense. And it certainly, as we are looking at that rating and run through the RL effort, we see great promise for that. The rating modernization effort is also something that is, we see great goodness in there as well. as we look at different aspects of information warfare, from our network operators and our network defenders as an example, where those skills clearly can be benefit from being more fluid in terms of what we're providing and how we're using those individuals with those skills. Talking about ITs and CT ratings, for example, is something that is a much smarter approach and a much smarter investment for us. And so those are all things that we are taking a look at in a very deliberate way and look to leverage that for one thing, which is a better output in terms of capability by our workforce.
I guess I'd just add that all the technology that my fellow panelists have already referenced has all kinds of potential benefits that we're starting to realize now. Obviously, there's the opportunity to be more efficient. There's the opportunity to be safer. I was able to visit with some of Admiral Szymanski's folks recently who using augmented reality, Oculus Rift, etc., are able to remain on dry land and give a special operator experience that could otherwise only be done at sea, and it really felt like I was submerged in at sea. So a lot of technologies which are going to be efficient, which are going to be safer, which are going to get us higher training throughput, and which potentially are going to be have the ability to deliver much more targeted, individualized kind of training relative to what the needs of the sailor are. That's all great. And of course, the thing that I think is most attractive about all this is that the kinds of tools and technologies that are being brought to us by you, our friends in industry, are very much the kinds of things that young sailors already are kind of experiencing, in their basements in high school and before they ever join the service. So we're finally able to deliver training through media and through products that they're actually very familiar with. Much more familiar and adept with than old folks like myself, and so it completely enhances and accelerates the learning.
Let me add on to that before we lose the point. Fritz, that's a great point, and frankly, when you talk about old, I think you're the only one on this panel.
I wasn't looking at you.
The need for a faster, more relevant training model is, I think it applies to all our warfare areas. I don't know that we'll ever really get away from a brick and mortar schoolhouse approach. We have a world-class NetC type of education and training command that I think will be critical for us in the future for foundational training, but certainly particularly in information warfare with technology changing so quickly. The ability to deliver training in a much more rapid and meaningful way. Fritz, you're exactly right. The younger force now is just so conducive and hungry for that different kind of training approach, and we've seen successes here. Kudos go out to a number of PMW organizations, POC4I and others. They're delivering an example for Canes, a virtual hosting training environment that allows upgrades to Canes and software patches and others. The training that actually gets out onto the platforms or into fleet concentration areas allows our workforce to get on that training and up to speed much, much faster than lifting them up, sending them TDY at a time when most units can't afford to do that, and getting back to a schoolhouse kind of setting is an example of exactly the direction we need to go, and certainly need help from industry in terms of how do we take that forward. Some of the tools that you mentioned, virtual reality and others, Fritz, are exactly where we need to be going, and frankly, where I see, while we're pacing training not as well as we could, that will become an increasingly large barrier for us in terms of delivering capability without that type of, I'll say more type of artful type of training environment.
So to add to this discussion, I'm going to sound like a broken record when I talk about return to sea control. And the reason I talk about it for the surface force, this is really a change in mindset for us. It's a change in mindset. And, the operational organizational principle for it is distributed lethality. A key part of that is the ability to fight through damage. I mean, we can look at history and we know that. And so, obviously as a surface warfare officer, I'm a big believer in ships and crews. Ships and crews have a symbiotic relationship. The ship gets you to the fight, the ship fights with you, and the ship brings you back. And so if you take that down to a level, there's the human machine part, and we typically talk about the machine part, the technical part. Ready, relevant learning, rating modernization is investment in the human part, the human machine, the ship crew part. We have to do it because ultimately our edge is going to be in our people. Another part of that is the leadership framework. Another part of that is the discussion on toughness. It's not just about a quality of life discussion. For us, it's the human part, the human weapon system of that ship crew part. So that's why we have to invest in ready, relevant learning, because we got to prepare our sailors for that day in the fight. And the day in the fight, when they get hit, can they keep their ship from sinking and stay in the fight, or at least get to somewhere else so they can get fixed?
Okay, I'll just ask one more, and then I'll turn it over to the audience. Be thinking about your question. We have a couple of mics up here near the front, and we'll need to use the mics when it's time. The bright, shiny object out there still, I think, is cybersecurity, and the fact that cybersecurity plays into everything else we do, either as a capability that we can employ or a threat surface with all our systems or all our networks, all our comms, et cetera. So the very simple question, and again, a toss-up, there might be a prime target out there in the middle somewhere. How worried are you about cybersecurity, and what as a Navy are we doing about it?
Is that supposed to be answerable in 30 seconds or less? I think we've been talking aspects about it here, and sorry, don't want to repeat myself in terms of where we're going. From my perspective, in terms of providing my responsibilities of providing a ready force that's well equipped across all of information warfare certainly applies to cybersecurity. And this is certainly not something that begins and ends within information warfare. Every one of the warfare areas has a big piece of cybersecurity. And there are some significant efforts here. I'm gonna steal into Pat's turf here a little bit, but Admiral Roden's initiative to establish his own cyber warfare mission area that we have been joined at the hip with you in terms of developing and writing into their surface force readiness manual the type of cybersecurity efforts that are required across every warfare area. That is a mission that is owned by the commanders, not just Admiral Gilday at Fleet Cyber. It is owned across each of the areas. It's a culture in terms of how it is addressed, and the individuals and the capabilities that reside on the platforms are the responsibilities of the platform owners equally in terms of how well cybersecurity is implemented. And getting to the basics, the way Pat, your organization has, and Admiral Roden's organization has, and the other warfare areas are essentially fundamental for us to get there. So, we've got a long way to go, and I don't think everyone would ever say they feel safe and can sleep, comfortably at night when they think about cybersecurity. It will always be something that will be challenging for us with a rapid change in terms of threats and capabilities. But I really do believe we have many of the basic approaches strongly in place. Something that Nav I-Force started when we first stood up was to initiate a number of initiatives, cybersecurity initiatives, one of which was a cybersecurity waterfront symposium. We are into our third year of that, and we hold multiple events in many of the fleet concentration areas in the Pacific and the Atlantic and others, where we bring together for several days a senior level commander's audience and an executive level the first day, and then continues on discussions for day 2 and day 3 with the deck plate sailors in terms of talking about the latest type of capabilities we're delivering, and just getting back to Admiral Stavridis' comments earlier, listening in terms of where are the challenges, what are the COs saying, what are the sailors saying, where are the challenges with the tools that they have, what are the shortfalls in the training, where can we deliver this more, and it is joined with the other TICOMs in terms of how we're taking that feedback and moving out with it. I really think we have a recognized sight picture where we've adjusted our cultural understanding across our warfare areas in terms of how we address this. But we'll never be at a 100% place. I think if we think we are there in cybersecurity, it's complacent. But I think we have a lot of strong initiatives in place to get us there.
So just to add on what Matt had to say, so again, I think it's a mindset, and sort of the nuke in me and the soul in me would go and say, single valve to C or single valve to high energy. I mean, the commanding officer signs a tag associated with that and approves that kind of work, because a failure of that valve will either sink the ship or kill someone. Well, I think that's sort of where we are with single valve to cyber. And so it's not I4's problem, it's my problem. And so with I4 support, because it's my ship, obviously, that's going to not be able to accomplish its mission. So we have to think about it in that respect. The challenge, of course, is, whereas I have this nice little diagram that very clearly shows me exactly what that valve is, it's much more complex when we talk about our networks and the various programs of record. So that's where I definitely need I4 support to say, hey, here are these 5,000 things, you got to go take a look at that. Somewhere in there's a single valve, go look at that. So we're moving down that path, and an important part is identifying the cyber warfare as a mission area. The flow training group is tackling that, we're training it, they're getting certified in that area. There's work to do, but again, I think we have to think about that. That's not I4's problem, that's not someone else's problem, that's my problem that directly affects my ability to execute my mission.
Can I jump in?
Sure.
So I'll take a contrarian view, a little, just for the sake of this panel. But cybersecurity, don't get me wrong, is imperative, and it's the most important aspect of cyber warfare, I think, in the way that all our critical infrastructure and our weapons and all have to work when under high peer competitor threat. But on the flip side of that, cyber is a tactical domain, and I think we have to be a little more bold and decisive in that space. As we move forward, I see the future of cyber for special operators as a core individual skill for SOF-enabled tactical cyber in support of tactical operations, tactical offensive cyber, that is. The enemy is, particularly in the VEO piece, we almost mischaracterized this morning the environment as permissive, and maybe from a communications and electronics piece on how we can communicate and use electronics against a threat like the violent extremist organization adversaries. But as Admiral Stavridis mentioned this morning, it's a sophisticated threat. The way they finance, the way they communicate, the way they radicalize, the way they incentivize in social media and on cyber tools. And it is a space that we're over-regulating, and I think policy is over-regulating to the point that we're seeding that space currently. But I'm pretty optimistic about the future. One core aspect for my force is try to ensure that people understand there's vulnerabilities in cyber and that they need to treat it as a loaded weapon at all times. But more importantly, things like identity management, mission management, a whole host of areas that we're investing in defense, counterintelligence, but also I don't want to lose sight of where we need to be in the offensive cyberspace.
Okay, industry is somewhat jealous of us in some regards in respect to cybersecurity and cyber protection and how we go about it, how we think about it. And some of the ways we talk about Navy things resonate well with industry. I mean, cyber is an all-hands responsibility, like damage control. Network segmentation is big now in cybersecurity, like watertight integrity. Resiliency, the ability to respond, the ability to fight through, is part and parcel of who we are with battle damage and being able to continue to fight and put the fire out on the ship. And then finally, accountability, now rising to the C-suite in industry, has been in the CO's stateroom or on the bridge in the CO's chair for a long time in the Navy. And so now I think it's resonating that all those things together philosophically as the Navy goes down its path and conducts cybersecurity of all our stuff. Okay, we'll open for questions now, and we'll play that out as long as it goes. I would ask you to please make it in the form of a question. If you have something that you'd like to ask this august panel. There are a couple of microphones up here. I see one over there. I can't see one over here for the podium, but I believe there's one over here too. Please tell us who you are, and then ask your question, and the floor is open. And if we don't get any, we'll have a longer lunch.
Is
this on? I'll make it an almost long lunch. My name's David Grover, and I'm actually probably the oddball here. I'm actually in the motion picture industry. Won an Academy Award for camera stabilization systems, et cetera. And I had started working with NSW and NECC, God, almost 8 or 10 years ago, and then the programs we were on, most of them kind of got wiped out because of sequestration. Is there an interest in looking at stabilization again for cameras and weapons?
I'd say, so for the most part, for the Mark VI craft and the stabilization of those weapons and the OIR that we have on there, that's been the place that we've looked to it the most. I think more so if we got into a different environment, back into OIF, OEF type of work, where we're looking at FOB defense, counter IED, that you could get back into that realm as well. But mainly for us, it's been on the Mark VI craft.
Okay.
I would only echo by saying yes. I mean, particularly with things where we're going with distributed lethality from small boats, from combatant craft, I think it's very important in maritime precision engagement that we've got stabilization technology, but without any deeper thoughts on it. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. And thank you all for being here for all of us.
Hi, good morning. Megan Eckstein with U.S. Naval Institute News. Thank you all for being here on the panel. Admiral Roegge, you talked about the need to be efficient in your training and certification time before deployments. I know you and Admiral Tafalo have spoken before about also trying to create more high-end training during that time, and I was just wondering how you're balancing both of those needs, and then if anyone else on the panel is having similar issues they're working through.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I missed the middle part of what you said. Admiral Tafalo and I also expressed an interest in...
Oh, trying to get more high-end training.
Oh.
Sorry.
Well, again, I don't see it those as contradictory. Anything that we can do in our improvements, our tuning of the FRTP is designed fundamentally to provide more blue days, more days at the discretion of a commanding officer to go out and train his crew. A lot of that training that we try and do, though, and what we're increasingly trying to do is try and coordinate those blue day periods such that you can have boats conducting their own individual training, but we can arrange the water space so that they can be doing it with the opportunity to work with each other. So we're able to create more opportunities for sub-on-sub, for individual commanding officers to hone their teams in undersea warfare. And then additionally, one of the initiatives from our Undersea Warfare Development Center, which I mentioned earlier, is kind of constituted to oversee all of our tactical development exercises, is they've done a great job of identifying some tactical objectives that can be developed and exercised kind of at the unit level. So we can basically give a commanding officer or two commanding officers, a shopping list of, hey, here's some things that we need to know more about. We'd like you to try and experiment with these and give us some feedback. So I think all those things work pretty synergistically. So I don't really see a conflict there.
I would add to Admiral Roegge's excellent response is we've talked about the certification events for the afloat platforms. Those things have been packed from the day they pull away from the pier to the day they finish. It is a stressing event. They always were. It's much more so. But there's never enough time to get to that point. And so we talked about SWAT and others. It's looking for every ounce of time for these units as they come out. They need to be at a different place as they're coming out of their basic phase. They need to be ready to start right into integrated phase and move out there. And I think that space has been so pressurized. Certainly from an IW perspective, all the folks, the information warfare professionals that are part of those units are part of that effort. And what has been included in that, as I mentioned before, how much information warfare delivery is capability from ashore, from the NCTAMs, NCTSs, the NIOCs, the Intel centers, the Fleet Weather centers. All of those now are increasingly part of that exercise as well. It's one continuum in terms of how we deliver our capabilities, and they're increasingly involved in those type of efforts as well. I would say, maybe to get at the point of your question is how do we continue to do more of that? We're pushing much more into the live, virtual, constructive environment type of areas for all the warfare areas to make better use. We need to. The steaming days are not increasing. and taking advantage of the time that they do have is just not enough there. And being able to do some of that from, when you're in port still is really kind of where I think all the forces are increasingly going to make sure they're ready for this high-end type of fight that we need to be prepared for.
You led right into my question. Scott Shipman, very simple question. Is it the assumption that these high-end threats require a high-end solution? I'll leave it there.
I would say the requirements haven't changed. I think the expectation of deploying Navy forces has to continue to cover the full spectrum of operations, from humanitarian relief type of operations to the high-end fight that they may face. What's changed is that we've not been, in the last 20 years, have not been challenged significantly so to this high-end fight, the sea control fight in those kind of areas. So it's, in some ways, it's adding to the additional training that used to be done to be ready. So nothing's changed. The Navy forces need to be ready to cover a full spectrum of warfare. But training to the high-end fight, I think, enables, in many ways, the ability to deal with, I'll say, lesser challenges. If they can play in the Super Bowl, they can play in the season.
I guess I would add, I don't think, it depends on what you mean by high-end solutions. So I don't believe that a high-end solution has to be an expensive one or a programmatic one. I think that the thing where the most exciting work is going on is with fairly inexpensive enabling kind of capabilities that are innovatively applied. And so I think the most important aspect of a high-end solution is the kind of the high end of the brain power going into thinking creatively about how to attack problems in innovative ways.
Yeah, I'll just add, it depends. What's the fight? Is it a fight for national survival? I mean, one would argue that President Reagan would have launched SDI. I'd say that's a high-end solution, but there are other things in a fight over something that we don't need a high-end solution, So I would say, going back to what everyone else has said, it depends. And again, it's a matter of resource and risk. I mean, if you throw everything into a high-end solution, what if you're wrong? And there's a lot of other solutions that are out there, but you didn't spend the money in other places. So.
And I would add, that's a perfect segue, that we make that choice when we build ships and how we design ships, regardless of whether they're aircraft carriers, destroyers, LCS, or submarines. We're making a choice, and that the high-end solution, the high unaffordable solution may not be the best one.
Well, just going back to what I was talking about for ship design, obviously any ship design, when you look at ship design, there's trade-offs in terms of what capabilities you want to build into that. But I think we have great opportunities here, particularly learning from Seawolf to Virginia, from Zumwalt to what's next in terms of, what's that additional capability? If you take a look at energy capacity, if you look at upgradability, something that, the Secretary of Work has talked about, there are things that you can build into that can adapt the capabilities at a lower cost, so that we can adjust, as we've been doing with our ships and designs, adjust as the threat changes. So, I mean, that's sort of what we have to have built in up front. Upgradability, shall we say, is part of that system of systems design, so it's not unique, that's too expensive to upgrade, when we've had plenty of examples of that before, where it's too expensive to upgrade, and that particular ship class has ended.
I'd like to pick up on that high-end solution. I'm Jack Nash. I'm Admiral Szymanski's strategy officer, but for full disclosure, this question has not been cleared through Admiral Szymanski.
And I'm not answering it.
And it's directed to Admiral Roegge, and the question is, should we be looking at diesel submarines? And the context of the question is that RAND Corporation did an analysis of alternatives for undersea clandestine insertion and found that diesel submarines are vastly cheaper in the case of an Australian submarine, under $250 million, and for special operations purposes, arguably more effective.
Well, I think, again, that discussion always, I think, has to start from kind of the first principles of, what is the nature of the mission that you need a submarine force for. If it has to do with, the high-end warfight, then what are the capabilities you need to bring to bear? If we're talking about peacetime presence, again, our submarine force, like all the warfare communities represented here, are multi-mission kind of platforms that are capable of contributing across the spectrum of conflict. So, as I look today at the sorts of tasks that Admiral Swift has in mind for the submarine force, I don't see an effective role for a diesel submarine in executing that vision. But should the taskings change, should the missions change, should the world change, then I think that's always a healthy discussion to have, internal to the Navy as well as external with the public. But for the time being, the thing that matters most in the current tasks that we have and the potential ones is the ability to take advantage of speed, of endurance, as well as stealth and firepower. And a lot of that comes kind of uniquely from nuclear power.
Since we don't have someone at the microphone, let me just ask one more, and it's on the low end or non-high-end solution to a high-end fight. We talked a lot about distributed lethality, and we talked a lot about network sensors and autonomous or distributed operations, disaggregated operations for our Navy. And we do that in a high-end context, in a comms challenged, perhaps, environment, maybe a comms denied environment. There was a lot of discussion over the last couple of years about a subordinate commander's ability to make decisions and execute the mission, and commander's intent, and an ability to go out and be, no kidding, alone and unafraid out there and still have a coordinated strategy that these units were going to affect tactically and win the warfight. Can you touch on what we're doing in that space and the preparing local commanders for the time when they won't be able to call home or get rudder or get guidance? Anybody?
I think we just, for the first time, practiced a strike group leaving on the West Coast, and they practiced an event called Fight to Hawaii, and it was an opportunity to take advantage of operating in exactly that kind of an environment where you may be cut off from higher headquarters. And started out, and I think there's a fleet commander panel either later today or tomorrow, and Admiral Tyson kind of ran this whole exercise. Some great lessons learned about how, just given commander's intent and the ability to both monitor your strike group assets and do it in an environment that you would expect to see elsewhere in the world, I think was a great learning point. And I think that really stressed the importance of being able to, on your own, be able to manage the fight just with some general commander's guidance. And I'm saying general commander's guidance, very specific in this case. But to take advantage of all the resources you've got in the strike group, use those to your best advantage, and all the other inputs you've got from a decision-making perspective as a strike group commander, realizing you're probably going to be cut off or the info will come very slowly or time late. I think that was a great example of the ways we're practicing now for when we get put in that environment here in the very near future, potentially.
Yeah, that's it.
From a soft perspective, we do that every day. I mean, I've got 1,000 personnel deployed in 35 some countries, today, and led at the 03, 04, E7, E8 level that are very empowered and actually operate in a more sophisticated environment and just as dangerous as any of the areas of active hostilities, which include some of those 35 countries, but also in the other than designated theaters of active armed conflict that are very remote, very arduous. The threat is real, and they're constrained by some ROE and some policies that they've got to navigate pretty adroitly, and they're good at it. They do it well. I'm not saying that makes them prepared for the high-end threat of this, but we are on a day-to-day, just by the nature of the business, are actually practicing that concept today.
Good afternoon, Pete Schmitz from Intel Corporation. Question for Admirals Roegge and Piercey. Expanding on the theme of readiness before expansion and in the face of funding constraint, it occurs to me that with the advances of Moore's Law increasing dramatically the capabilities of compute, storage, really small supercompute on ships, is the idea of third offset and potentially expanding the capabilities in some of your programs, whether it's ARCI, SMITI, Aegis 2, is the awareness of this dramatic expansion of capabilities making its way to you and your request as type commanders for the capabilities of these future programs?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as I mentioned earlier, I think some of the most exciting work that's going on isn't necessarily involving, a new multi-million or billion-dollar platform. It has to do with, relatively inexpensive kinds of things that where a submarine is able to take advantage of other capabilities that either enable or enhance its own capabilities or in support of other naval forces. So, I don't know that I know everything because I don't know what I don't know, but we have a very active and robust engagement with industry, with the systems commands, and with the warfare centers to try and identify what those best technologies are, where there are opportunities, and try and bring them into play. In fact, we've have a undersea warfare transition advisory board that we have recently stood up, whose whole purpose is to see what is sort of in the state of industry and the state of the possible, and figure out where there are ideas that we can rapidly transition into capabilities demonstrated at sea, with a goal of being able to transition into a program of record in less than 2 years, which I know doesn't sound very agile, but by our normal acquisition standards, we feel like we're moving at light speed.
So I'd offer a couple of observations. So first, working with industry, we've seen where we've been innovative within existing constraints. I mean, the Yuck 7 sailors out here, to build in the the Yuck 43s, right? And so I did cruiser modernization on Bunker Hill, ACB-08. It's a different name now. So, but that was open architecture, building and backfitting in open architecture. So I think we've been innovative within the constraints we've had. If you look at where we've gone with our ASW sensors in terms of, sort of, I'd say, the spiral development of some of these systems. But if you look at, as we build our future ships, I think more consciously building in upgradability. So in other words, hey, here's a foundation, here's a standard cabling interface sort of, connections. Here's the box. All I got to do is plug in the box, and it does all this Gucci stuff. Now I just need to pull the box out, and I stick in a new box. I mean, this is where the submarine community is going with the standard integrated enclosures. So I think, and so I provide the air conditioning, the cooling water, and the electricity, and then you just plug in all these different boxes. I build patches where it's easier to put it in and pull it out, so I don't need to spend a year or 18 months in the shipyard. If that's consciously part of that design, I think we can find ourselves to be more innovative and continue to sort of more rapidly refresh the force, pacing faster and at cheaper cost, because we just can't, we can't make it too expensive. So.
Okay, I'd like to thank the panel for your really terrific comments this morning. Great job up here with the questions and the insight, and I'd like to thank the audience for your participation and your support. With that, I think we're complete. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, please thank the panel.
Well done.
We are, as mentioned, the constraints are real, but so is the innovation and the attitudes you see up here. Warfighters preparing to maintain that edge as they go from ready today to modernizing for tomorrow. I can't thank you enough for the perspectives you offered and the start you gave us to a very good event ahead of us. We've got solutions on the floor, of course, for you to see. We've got lunch at 12 o'clock with Admiral Harris. And as well, for the panel, I'd like to present to them as we depart a USNI book published, Scales on War, Bob Scales, a land warrior I know well, but who would fit right in and fit well with this panel of all-stars. Ladies and gentlemen, one more time, let's thank the panel.